Okay, Lieutenant Colonel Francis E. Babe Hawke, and we are flying on our way to Italy. We've landed in Wales, and now we're leaving Wales on the next leg. Go ahead.
Yeah, on January 20th of 1945, we flew from Bali, Wales to Marrakesh, French Morocco, North Africa. It was a 8-hour and 13-minute mission. We were there, and on the 22nd of January, we flew from Marrakech to Algiers. We took off about 8 o'clock in the morning and landed at noon. We were supposed to have gone to Tunis, but because of a massive dust storm past Algiers, we landed at Algiers. And while taxiing, the B-24 sank in the mud and broke the tail skid, so instead of getting out the next day, the 23rd, we didn't leave until the 24th. On the 24th, then, we flew from Algiers to Tunis. And then on the 28th, we flew from Tunis to Manduria, Grottaglia in southern Italy. On February 2nd, we flew from Manduria, Grottaglia to San Giovanni and left the airplane there. It was only a short ride. We took a 2.5-ton truck to our new base at Cerignola, 758th Bomb Squadron, 459th Bomb Group, 15th Air Force. On May 12th, I was promoted from second lieutenant to first lieutenant.
So you say, but you left the airplane. Why didn't you take the airplane with you to Cerignola?
Because they assigned them to groups that needed them.
Okay, so you were just basically ferrying this plane over.
That's where it turned out to be. We wished we could have kept it, yeah, because it was an L, which was the latest B-24 there was.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you were just kind of ferrying it over, and then you get your own plane. Which
Yeah.
So let's talk about what was the camp at Cerignola like? What were the living conditions?
Well, the field was called Gioia Field, and it was just outside of the town of Cerignola. We had World War I squad tents and dirt floor, and we had regular Army cots that we slept in. In the middle of the tent, we had a 50-gallon drum that was cut in half and turned upside down, and we had a gas line from a gas tank outside that fed the gas into the bottom of the half drum.
Liquid gas.
Liquid gas. And that was our heat, and it just dripped. You had to adjust it so it just dripped for heat. And what we'd try to do is we'd try to put our helmets on top with water in it to warm them enough to shave by. And because we had no hot water, had no way to take a bath at all. But at the, as I say, we were in the 459th Bomb Group, and we were in the 758th Squadron. In the 759th Squadron, they had built showers, so we were allowed to go down there once a week to take showers. And after the war, later on, ran into a fellow who had built those showers. Mm. And he was married to a girl who was in my class in high school. Oh, really? That's how we met him, yeah.
So how many to a tent?
There were 8 of us in the tent. They were called 10-man tents, but we got pictures of them here that show what they looked like. But every now and then one would go up and in flames.
From
yeah.
Those heaters you used,
yeah,
probably.
right.
Yeah.
From that gasoline.
And those heaters were permitted? Obviously.
Oh yeah, it's the only way we would get heat. They didn't have any heaters for us. But we slept in those tents, and then we would call it sweating out footsteps in the morning when we heard the guy coming to wake us up to go to have breakfast and then go to the briefing. But we would know that we were going on a mission the next day. They would tell us. But we would get up and immediately go have breakfast. There was a old farmhouse It was a solid building, in other words. And we'd have breakfast that consisted of powdered eggs, never any meat of any kind unless it was spam. But the spam was not like the spam that we know. It was horrible.
I kind of like spam.
Just horrible. But then after that, we would go back and grab our bags and go to the briefing.
So these were on the days of missions.
Pardon?
These were on the days you had missions.
Yeah, on the days we had missions.
So would you say on average you'd have a mission every other day, every third day?
Yeah, about that. Yeah, sometimes it was every other day. Some nights it was every day. But the briefing would consist of the whole crew being seating together, and like you see in the movies, this great big map that showed the route from your base to rendezvous with the other aircraft over the Adriatic, and then proceeding to the turning points and then the initial point for bombing, and then coming off of the target and the route coming back to Italy. So that was how that went. But during the briefing, they would brief us on the target, they'd brief us on the weather, they'd brief us on intelligence, on what to expect as far as fighters, what to expect as far as flak, and any other things that would affect your mission. And the further you went, why, of course, the greater the problems were, because they didn't know that much about the weather once you got over the Alps. So, yep.
It was your view that somehow the Germans knew you were coming?
Yes, there's no doubt about it in their minds. Yeah. They were ready for us. They were ready. The only time that we could get away with them not was we would fly a single aircraft mission at night, and they would bomb, say, a refinery and catch them with their boilers going, which would do more damage than the bombs would, because they would blow up. Plus the people wouldn't be waiting for us, because normally what they would do, if they knew they were going to be hit, they would drain the boilers in the plant, and so that when the bombs did hit, why, they wouldn't blow up.
Right.
Cause a lot of damage. So, but
and then you had some help though, right, from the locals in the camp? Were locals allowed into the camp? And
oh yeah, we had a houseboy who was 40 years old. I think he had 7 or 8 kids, married. He lived in the town of Cerignola, and he'd come in every day and clean up, sweep the dirt floor, and he'd do that for several tents. And when we'd get back from a mission, we'd give him a couple of boxes of sea rations, and he'd take those home. And after the war, he invited us down to his house for spaghetti and sea rations.
Sea rations.
Yeah.
Now, on days when you didn't have missions, how would you spend the day?
Just mostly lolling around, resting, because the missions were long, and when you got up at 4 o'clock, 4:30 in the morning, and then you flew an 8 or 9 hour mission, from the time you got up to the time you got briefed, went down and did your pre-flight, and then took off and came back and did your debriefing, it could be 12, 14 hours. So you were tired when you got back, very tired. And tense.
Yeah. Now the days when you didn't fly a mission, were you just kind of restless? Did the time go by very slowly?
No, just rested mostly. We'd, as a navigator, I had to continue to keep up with celestial navigation. So I had to do the celestial navigation and turn in the maps that showed the position. And I think I have a picture here of my doing that in one of these pictures. Yeah. I don't know where it is. Maybe it's in our other pictures.
Well, at what point did you get promoted to lead navigator of the squadron? Or
After the 5th mission. Then I was sent down to lead navigation school at Bari, Italy, and it was a week course. That was an interesting story because I had just finished the Leech Crew School and had left my bag packed up in the room, went down and had breakfast, and was going to come back and get my bag and go back to the base. And I had breakfast with the squadron navigator was there that morning, so we had breakfast together. When I went back up, a very dear and old friend was sitting there, and he was just being signed to the same school that I was leaving, and he'd seen my B4 bag with my name on it.
Mm.
And so I went back to the squadron navigator and said, "Can I take the weekend?" He said, "Sure." So this fellow's name was Bob McGeorge. So we had a nice weekend together.
That's great.
Yeah.
Junior high days.
And he'd gone through high school with me. We both joined the same fraternity together, and went into the cavalry together. Went through flying school together at Hondo, and that's where we separated. He went to a different base in Italy, but he went through the same type of training.
Now, were there any recreational facilities on the base?
No, there were none.
So what did you just hung around your tent and read?
Yes,
and
some of us had baseball mitts, and we'd throw a baseball around. Footballs, we had footballs, and we'd throw those around. Yeah. Or we'd go down to the Adriatic, which was only about 30 miles away, and swim in the ocean.
You could check out a Jeep or something and drive down there, or what?
Yeah. Or hitchhike
Was there an officer's mess or an officer's club or anything like that?
down at the beach.
Or anywhere?
Well, we had one on the base, yeah, which serviced all three squadrons, plus the maintenance people and intelligence people and the higher up people.
Other than the man who helped you with your tent, did you have any interaction with the Italians?
No, never did. You'd go into town like Foggia was a fairly good-sized town. You wouldn't even see Italians. Wouldn't even see them. And I was walking down the street in Foggia one day, and I heard this guy yell out my name, and he jumped out of the back of a weapons carrier. He was in a winter overcoat and looked like he was about 6'10" and weighed 250 pounds. And it turned out he was a kid from Tucson, Arizona. He saw me and recognized me. That was just amazing.
What was his name? Remember?
Carlos Aros.
Really?
Yeah.
You met a lot of people from Arizona.
Oh, sure did. And in fact, it was on that trip I went down to Lead Cruise School. We had to go through a river, and the Germans had bombed the bridge, and they only allowed traffic to come one way. So we were allowed to go through from north to south, and the lead Jeep coming the other way was a fellow by the name of Porky Patton, who had been a representative for Arizona to Congress. And he was a good friend of our families, and he was a major. So we talked for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then they stopped the traffic coming from where I'd come from and allow him. So I got on a truck and went on down to Barrie to school. But But I ran into people from the University of Arizona. I ran into a major, a female, who had been in class with Brother George. And she was stationed there in Barrie, Italy. And so,
Now, Porky was actually Porqué, right?
yeah, Porky.
Yeah, 'cause okay.
We called him Porky.
Yeah.
It wasn't Porky, it was Porky,
Yeah.
Porky.
Now, let's talk about the airplane. Your airplane was this is before you became a lead navigator, so you had your own airplane, right? Basically, the crew in the airplane.
Yeah. Well, you were assigned the aircraft when you went to briefing, and you didn't know which aircraft you were going to get.
So let's talk. It's B-24.
Yeah, B-24.
Tell us about the B-24.
Well, the B-24 was 4-engine, high wing, 2 vertical stabilizers. Starting from the nose, it had a nose turret, which the early ones didn't. They just had plexiglass. And but I think from about the F or G, they started having the turret. And so you had a turret operator in the front, And then below him was where the bombardier was, looking out the plexiglass underneath the turret. Then right back of that was the navigator, who had a bench, and you could see out. And right above it was the bubble for doing celestial navigation, which of course you never used in combat. Then you got on your hands and knees and crawled up between the pilot and the co-pilot, and they sat side by side looking out the front window. And then right behind them was the engineer and the radio operator. And then you'd go through the bomb bay back to the back, and you had your two waist guns, and then further clear at the end was your tail gunner. And then between the two waist gunners was your Sperry ball gunner, which was lowered into the airstream after you took off.
It was not pressurized.
Oh no, not heated,
Not heated.
nothing. Just thin, very thin skin. So it was very cold at altitude over the Alps.
So how fast would it go?
We'd indicate about 165.
And
Maybe come out with a true airspeed of 175, 180.
and what was your cruising altitude?
Normally it would be between 28 and 30,000.
So you'd been on oxygen the whole time?
No, not until you reached about 10,000 feet would you go on
That's-
oxygen.
yeah, but
Yeah.
the entire time you're in cruising
Yeah,
altitude.
if it was night, you went on oxygen immediately. Yeah,
And cold?
very, very
How did you
cold.
stay warm?
Yeah. Well, we wore a lot of clothes. We were issued heated clothes when we left the United States, but they never worked, or they didn't work very
I
long.
mean, they were supposed to generate heat?
Yeah, they were electrified.
Really?
Yeah.
And you would communicate through, how would you communicate to each other? Because it must have been very loud.
Yeah, well, we all wore helmets and goggles, of course. And then in our oxygen mask, we had our microphone. So we could talk to each other, hit the button, and I could say, pilot, this is navigator, I need a change of heading to such and such. And
How long would a typical mission take from beginning to end?
most of them took about 8 hours.
Okay.
Yeah.
At any time, anybody sleep during the mission?
Yeah, they could, out over the Adriatic as an example, but you were busy. When we got over the Adriatic, we'd test fire the guns, so they were busy doing that, loading the guns and test firing them. But from then on, it was, your chances of getting flak and fighters. So the waist gunners were awake all the time, as was the Sperry ball gunner and the tail gunner. And of course the nose gunner.
And I imagine you as a navigator were probably constantly taking fixes and making sure your course
Well,
was correct.
didn't take any pictures, but
Taking fixes.
Huh?
Taking fixes.
Oh yeah, yeah. And most of it was fixes of that you could see the ground.
Oh, okay.
Of course, you knew your route. You know where you were supposed to be, so on your map you had a line, and you knew when you were going to hit the coast of northern Italy. And yeah.
What was it like taking flak?
Well, flak was usually you start getting flak almost immediately from the initial point, the IP, going to the target. And the reason for that is because you had to stay steady. You couldn't do any types of evasion because the bombardier had control of the ship, and you'd be going straight for there. And when the flak hit, why they would zero in on you, and then you start getting holes in your airplane.
And how often did you come? How many missions were you on?
I was on 23.
And of those 23 missions, how many did you come back with holes in your airplane?
Everyone.
Everyone?
Yeah.
So you take flak on every mission?
The only time we didn't were on the missions over northern Italy. Yeah.
And how nerve-wracking was that?
Very nerve-wracking because you're busy, and then all of a sudden you have a piece of flak come right through between you, and say between you and the bombardier, and come in one side and go out the other, and you're busy, And this is disconcerting, very disconcerting. Yeah.
And that piece of flak could have killed either one of you.
Oh yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
But on one mission we had 450 holes in the airplane.
Really? And did you have casualties on that mission?
Yeah, we had 2 people killed.
Really? 2 people killed on the aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
And okay.
Yeah.
How many? We'll talk about your 2 times you were shot down later, but in the missions where you weren't shot down, how many casualties did you?
Didn't have any. The only time we had casualties was the one time we went down in Yugoslavia.
Uh-huh. So on the missions where you came back safely, there were never any casualties.
No. Now we had aircraft that were blown up. You could see them. I mean, you were in formation with them, and you would be a box of 4, and there'd be a box of 4 over to your left, and you'd see the whole box explode, just disappear. You'd see 40 guys killed immediately.
Wow.
Just didn't see any parachutes.
Wow. And so, of that, say, 8-hour mission, what percentage of the time were you probably taking flak?
The first time you take flak is when you entered northern Italy, and then you get through that flak because the Alps were quite high, 14,000 feet, and they didn't have any guns up there. But as soon as you got across the Alps and got in the vicinity of targets, then you start getting flak again. But we tried to avoid those flak areas, as you could see on the flak map I had, and we tried to go in between those, and that was up to the lead crew, of course.
So of that 8 hours, were you taking flak for maybe, what, 30 minutes?
Yeah, 20 to 30 minutes, mostly over the target. A lot of times when you're entering Italy, you'd get flak, and if you went close to a flak site, well, you'd get it too. Like over the Brenner Pass, you had flak the whole length of the pass.
Now, was Brenner Pass for most of your missions kind of your main route through the Brenner Pass?
No, when you went through the Brenner Pass, you usually hit the Brenner Pass itself, the railroads and the bridges in the pass, or you'd hit Munich, which was at the northern end of it.
Okay. So that wasn't a route, that was a target.
Yeah.
Okay. And there was a lot of flak around the Brenner Pass then.
Oh, solid. Solid.
And then when you generally when you finished your run, then you'd come back out over the Adriatic and come back to the base over the Adriatic.
Yes.
Okay.
We'd usually come back the same way we went in.
And then you'd land, and what was the routine after you landed the
Well,
airplane?
you would land and you would get all your gear together, get on a truck, and go back for debriefing. And they had debriefers for each crew. And then you would go to intelligence debriefing. And then if anybody had been hit, well, you went through medical debriefing. But what they were trying to do is get information that you saw that would bring their information up to date. So when they briefed the next day, where they would have that new information.
And were you taking photographs? Were photographs being taken?
No, the photographs were being taken, but by a photo ship.
But a separate airplane that was long. Okay.
Yeah.
And when you exited the airplane, was there a routine? Generally, was there somebody there to meet you? And
Well, there were vehicles there to meet you, and you put all your stuff in a flight bag, as we call it. It was a big bag that held your outer clothes and your helmet and your your oxygen mask, and then you threw that onto the truck. Well, by this time you were maybe down to just your flight suit instead of all the heavy gear. And
were you offered anything?
yeah, we offered coffee and sometimes donuts and a shot of whiskey. Called it combat whiskey.
Was that right at the plane or when you got back to the?
At debriefing, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you ever take the whiskey?
No, it was horrible. I'd trade it for cigars.
Cigars. Okay.